What do you do when you find evidence of a world that shouldn't exist? The Harpoon was still cold from the seabed when I first held it. 10,000 years old, carved by hands that hunted in a land now buried under 300 feet of water. A land larger than the Netherlands. A land that vanished so completely that for centuries, no one even knew it was there. They call it Doggerland. 17,000 square miles of forests, rivers, and wetlands connecting Britain to mainland Europe. Home to sophisticated Mesolithic people who carved ritual marks into human bones, who tracked giant aurochs through river valleys, who gathered in numbers we can barely imagine. And then, around 8,200 years ago, it drowned. But here's what keeps me searching. The evidence doesn't add up. There should be more settlements, more artifacts, more proof. Did a massive tsunami erase an entire civilization in hours? Or did they watch their world shrink generation by generation, adapting until adaptation was no longer possible? Why do some bones show deliberate post-mortem modifications? What happened on the last island that refused to sink? And what secrets are still waiting in the depths, preserved in mud that hasn't seen oxygen in 8 millennia? I've walked through desert tombs and jungle ruins, but this is different. This is an entire world erased by water, and you're coming with me into the cold, into the dark, into the 15 unsolved mysteries of Doggerland that science still can't explain. Pack light. The depths keep their secrets close. I first learned about the Kalinda Harpoon in a dusty archive in London, but I didn't truly understand it until I held a replica in my hands on the deck of a research vessel 60 miles off the English coast. The weight of it surprised me. Not heavy, but substantial, purposeful. This was a tool made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. In 1931, a fishing trawler named the Kalinda was working the waters near the Leyman and Ower banks, dragging nets across the floor of the North Sea. When the crew hauled up their catch, something unusual tangled in the mesh. A barbed spear point, meticulously carved from red deer antler, worn smooth by hands that gripped it millennia ago. The fisherman nearly tossed it back, just another piece of debris from the seabed, but the captain saw something different, something that didn't belong there. He kept it. And eventually, it made its way to archaeologists who recognized what they were looking at. A tool from the Mesolithic, over 10,000 years old, fashioned by people who hunted in a land that no longer exists. No maps showed this place. No historical texts described it. No legends spoke of it. Yet here was proof, tangible and undeniable, that an entire world once thrived where now only fishing boats and dark water remain. The Harpoon is beautiful in its simplicity. A single barb carved into the side, angled backward to catch flesh and hold fast. The shaft tapered to fit a wooden handle that rotted away centuries ago. Traces of polish where fingers gripped it, thousands of times in pursuit of seal or salmon or something else we can only guess at. This wasn't crude work, this was precision. This was knowledge refined over generations and passed down through families who lived in a world we're only now beginning to understand. The Kalinda Harpoon wasn't just an artifact. It was the first whisper of Doggerland, and it opened a door that archaeologists are still trying to walk through. Before this discovery, the idea that a vast inhabited landmass once connected Britain to mainland Europe was purely theoretical. Geologists suspected it based on seabed topography, but they had no proof. The Harpoon changed that. It was physical evidence that people had lived, hunted, and thrived in a place that had been underwater for 8,000 years. But if one harpoon surfaced by accident, what else is down there, waiting in the silt and sand? Over the decades since the Kalinda's discovery, nearly 2,000 more bone and antler artifacts have been dredged up by fishing trawlers working the North Sea. Each one a fragment, each one a clue, and each one raising more questions than it answers. Who were these people? How did they live? What did they believe? And most hauntingly, what happened to them when the waters came? The Harpoon sits in a museum now, behind glass, labeled and cataloged. But I think about the last person who held the original, the hunter who lost it, perhaps during a struggle with a wounded seal in shallow water. Did they search for it? Did they curse their carelessness? Or did they simply carve another and move on, unaware that their tool would one day be the key to rediscovering an entire lost world? The answer lies somewhere beneath the waves, in a land that drowned in silence. And that land has a story we're only beginning to hear. Standing on the white cliffs of Dover, I tried to imagine what the horizon looked like 12,000 years ago. No channel, no separation between England and France, no narrow strip of water keeping Britain isolated from the continent. Just a vast rolling plain stretching eastward, thick with forests, rivers, and wetlands teeming with life. The view would have been completely unrecognizable to modern eyes. Doggerland wasn't a bridge. It wasn't some narrow land corridor that people occasionally crossed. It was a heartland. More than 17,000 square miles of territory, larger than the Netherlands, connecting what we now call Britain to the European mainland. Rivers cut through it, lakes dotted its interior, coastlines stretched along what is now the North Sea basin, and those coasts would have been among the richest hunting and gathering grounds in all of Northern Europe. Archaeologist Brian Coles gave it a name in the late 90s, borrowing from the Doggerbank, a submerged sandbank frequented by Dutch fishing vessels called doggers. But Doggerland itself had been nameless for 8,000 years, swallowed by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. It vanished so completely that for centuries no one even suspected it had existed. No ruins poked above the waves, no oral traditions preserved its memory. It simply disappeared. What haunts me most is how thoroughly it was erased. Other ancient sites leave traces. Temples crumble but remain. Cities fall but leave foundations. Even civilizations lost to war or plague leave something behind for archaeologists to find. But Doggerland left almost nothing visible, just flat gray water stretching to every horizon, cold and relentless, keeping its secrets locked beneath currents and sediment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In the early 2000s, oil companies conducting seismic surveys for offshore drilling inadvertently mapped the subsurface geology of the North Sea in extraordinary detail. And there it was, buried under centuries of marine sediment. The ghost of an entire landscape emerged in the data. Riverbeds carved deep into ancient bedrock. Valleys that once carried fresh water to the sea. Lake basins where Mesolithic families might have camped during seasonal migrations. Thousands of miles of rivers snaking across a vast plain, their courses still visible in the seismic imaging. Recent mapping has revealed a landscape as complex as any we know today. Hills rising from wetlands, estuaries where rivers met the sea, forests clustering along watercourses. It wasn't empty wilderness, it was prime real estate for hunter-gatherers, rich in resources, abundant in game, and perfectly positioned at the crossroads of Northern Europe. If you wanted to design the ideal environment for Mesolithic people, you'd create something that looked exactly like Doggerland. But the land remembered even when humans forgot. And slowly, piece by piece, it's starting to speak. The seismic data gives us geography, but geography is just the skeleton. What we really want to know is who lived there, how they adapted to the changing world, what they believed and feared and hoped for, and whether they knew in those final generations that their entire world was drowning. To answer those questions, we need to look at the shadows they left behind, the faint traces of lives lived in rhythm with a land that no longer exists. The people of Doggerland left almost nothing behind that we can easily find. No pottery, no great monuments, no stone circles or burial mounds rising above the landscape. Just stone tools, bone fragments, and the faint traces of lives lived in rhythm with the land and sea. They moved lightly through their world, and when that world drowned, most of what they were went with it. They were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, part of cultures like the Maglemosian, who occupied northern Europe between 9000 and 6000 BCE. These weren't primitive survivors scraping by in a harsh world. They were sophisticated people who had perfected the art of living in post-glacial Europe. They made microliths, delicate stone blades no larger than a fingernail, used as barbs for arrows and fishing spears. They carved axes from flint and antler. They fished with harpoons like the one pulled up by the Kalinda. They hunted seals along the coasts, tracked aurochs through riverside forests, and gathered at seasonal sites where salmon ran thick in the rivers. But here's what keeps me awake at night. In most archaeological sites, only the stone survives. Everything organic, the wood, the textiles, the shelters, the baskets, the cordage, all of it dissolves into time. So we're looking at these people through a keyhole, seeing only the tiniest fraction of their material culture. And material culture is just the surface. We don't hear their songs. We don't know their stories. We can't see their rituals or understand their beliefs. We're trying to reconstruct an entire civilization from scattered stone tools and occasional bone fragments, like trying to understand modern society from nothing but hammers and nails. The mapping helps. Seismic data shows us where rivers met coastlines, where wetlands would have drawn game, where high ground offered shelter from seasonal floods. We can identify places where Mesolithic camps should be, locations that would have been perfect for seasonal gatherings or semi-permanent settlements. But knowing where they might have lived and knowing who they were, those are two very different things. Geography tells us potential, artifacts tell us capability, but neither tells us meaning. And the more I learn about Doggerland, the more I realize how much we've lost. How many innovations, how many techniques, how many ways of understanding the world disappeared beneath the waves without leaving a single trace? Did they have oral histories that stretched back generations? Did they map the stars or track the seasons through song? Did they name the rivers and tell origin stories about the land? Almost certainly, but we'll never know the details. Yet, strange clues keep surfacing. Clues that suggest these people were far more complex than we've given them credit for. Tools that show specialized knowledge, worked bone that hints at ritual practices, evidence of long-distance trade and social networks stretching across hundreds of miles. And most intriguing of all, marks on human bone that tell a story of belief, ceremony, and practices we're only beginning to understand. Practices that force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Mesolithic life. And those marks, those deliberate cuts made with stone tools on the bones of the dead, are where the real mystery begins. There's a fragment of human jawbone in a research facility that I've stared at longer than I care to admit. It belonged to someone who lived in Doggerland around 8,300 years ago, preserved in the oxygen-free mud of the North Sea floor. The bone itself is extraordinary, one of the few human remains ever recovered from that drowned world. But it's not the bone that unsettles me. It's the marks. Post-mortem cut marks. Deliberate, precise, made after death. Someone took a stone blade and carefully carved into this jawbone after the person died, and they did it with purpose. These weren't accidental scratches or damage from scavenging animals. These were intentional modifications, part of some kind of practice we can barely comprehend from our distance of 8,000 years. Archaeologists are cautious about interpretation, and rightly so. It's dangerous to project modern ideas onto ancient behavior, but the evidence suggests ritual. Some kind of mortuary practice, possibly defleshing, or secondary burial rites performed on the dead. The cuts are consistent with deliberate removal of tissue, done carefully, methodically, as part of a process that mattered deeply to whoever performed it. This changes everything. We think of Mesolithic people as practical, survival-focused, moving light through the landscape with minimal baggage. We imagine them as pragmatic opportunists, following game, exploiting seasonal resources, living entirely in the present moment. But ritual requires belief. It requires culture, continuity, meaning. It suggests they honored their dead in ways that went far beyond simple burial. It means they had concepts of the afterlife, or ancestors, or spiritual transformation. It means they invested time and energy into practices that had nothing to do with immediate survival. So who were they honoring? And why did they carve into bone as part of that process? Was it to release the spirit? To prepare the body for another world? To maintain a connection with ancestors? Or something else entirely? Something so foreign to our understanding that we don't even have words for it. The jawbone isn't alone. Other bone fragments recovered from Doggerland show similar marks, scattered across different sites, different time periods, hinting at a shared tradition. A tradition that persisted for centuries, maybe millennia, passed down through generations who lived and died in that drowned world. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. This was culture. This was belief made manifest through action. What haunts me is the intimacy of it. Someone held this jawbone in their hands. Someone who knew the person it belonged to, who perhaps loved them, who certainly cared enough to perform this ritual with precision and intention. They worked carefully, honoring the dead through this strange, unsettling practice. And then the bone was placed somewhere, buried or deposited in water, or left in a special location where it remained for thousands of years until a fishing trawler dragged it back into the light. But if they had rituals for the dead, what other beliefs shaped their world? What other ceremonies did they perform? What gods or spirits did they acknowledge? And what happened to those beliefs when the waters came? When the land itself began to drown? Did they see it as punishment or natural change? Did they pray for it to stop? The answers might lie in the event that may have ended everything. A catastrophe so massive it would have seemed like the wrath of the earth itself. About 8,200 years ago, something catastrophic happened off the coast of Norway. A massive underwater landslide, now called the Storgugga Slide, sent billions of tons of sediment cascading down the continental shelf. The scale is almost incomprehensible. An area roughly the size of Scotland suddenly gave way, slumping into the deep ocean, displacing unimaginable volumes of water in seconds. The resulting tsunami was apocalyptic. Waves estimated at 65 feet high roared across the North Sea, scouring coastlines, flooding valleys, and reshaping the geography of northern Europe in a matter of hours. To put that in perspective, a 65-foot wave is taller than a 5-story building, and it traveled at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour in deep water, slowing only as it approached the shallows, where it reared up and crashed down with devastating force. For decades, archaeologists have debated whether this single event destroyed Doggerland or whether the land was already drowning slowly from rising sea levels. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but the question matters because it speaks to how the end came. Was it gradual, generational, a slow retreat before encroaching waters? Or was it sudden, violent, a single catastrophic day that ended a world? I've seen cores extracted from the seabed, columns of ancient sediment that hold the memory of that day. Layers of broken shells, stones, plastic debris, and turbulent deposits sandwiched between calm, laminar sediments. The contrast is striking. Thousands of years of peaceful accumulation, then chaos, then calm again. The sediment doesn't lie. Something violent happened. But here's the mystery. Very little direct archaeological evidence of the tsunami exists on land. Sites in Scotland and Norway show some disruption, but the scale of destruction we'd expect is strangely absent. Sediment layers contain tsunami deposits, yes, but where are the obliterated settlements? Where are the mass casualty sites? Where is the clear archaeological break between before and after? Did the tsunami scour away the evidence, dragging it back into the sea during the drawdown? Anyone who's seen footage of modern tsunamis knows the retreat is often as destructive as the arrival. The water surges inland, then pulls back, carrying everything with it. Buildings, vehicles, trees, and yes, archaeological sites, all dragged into the ocean and scattered across the seabed. If that happened to Doggerland's coastal settlements, we may never find them in their original locations. Or was Doggerland already so diminished by then, so reduced to scattered islands and marshland, that the wave simply finished what the sea had already begun? Perhaps the main populations had already relocated inland, following retreating coastlines, and only small groups remained when the tsunami struck. Perhaps there weren't many people left to leave evidence behind. The timing is eerie. The Storegga tsunami coincided with the 820 kiloyear cold snap, one of the harshest climate events of the Holocene. Within decades of each other, perhaps within years, Doggerland was hit by a double catastrophe. First the cold, then the wave, or perhaps the cold first, then the wave, then deeper cold as climate systems destabilized further. Either way, it was a convergence of disasters that would have tested any society to its limits. But even as catastrophe struck, one place held on longer than the rest, a final refuge rising above the drowning plain. Even as the waters rose, one place held on longer than the rest. Dogger Bank, a high sandbank, a ridge of glacial debris left behind by retreating ice sheets, sitting in what is now the middle of the North Sea. For centuries after the rest of Doggerland disappeared beneath the waves, Dogger Bank remained above water, a final refuge, a last island in an ever-expanding ocean. I try to imagine what it must have been like, watching the land shrink year by year, generation by generation, coastlines retreating, rivers flooding, forests drowning, the sea rising an average of 6 feet every century. That might sound slow, but think about what it means in human terms. Slow enough that no single lifetime would see the full transformation, but fast enough that grandparents could tell stories of places that no longer existed, hunting grounds that were now underwater, campsites swallowed by marshland, rivers that once ran clear but now mixed with salt water and tides. By around 6100 BCE, Dogger Bank was the only piece of Doggerland still above water. Everything else, all 17,000 square miles of plains, forests, and river valleys, had been claimed by the North Sea. What remained was a shrinking island, perhaps 30 miles across at its widest point, surrounded by cold gray water in every direction. Did people live there in those final years? Did they watch the horizon and know that their world was ending? Or did they adapt, becoming islanders, seafarers, people of the waves rather than the plains? The evidence is frustratingly sparse, but logic suggests they must have been there. Dogger Bank would have been the last remnant of the richest hunting and gathering territory in Northwest Europe, the last place where traditions stretching back thousands of years could continue, the last anchor point for cultures that had called Doggerland home since the ice retreated. I think about what it means to be the last generation of a world, to know, or at least sense, that everything your ancestors built and believed in is ending, that the land itself is betraying you, slowly drowning beneath your feet. Did they rage against it? Did they accept it as inevitable? Did they develop myths and stories to explain why the waters came? Perhaps they saw it as a punishment, or perhaps they understood it as natural change, no different than the turning of seasons or the migration of game. Eventually, even Dogger Bank slipped under. The richest landscape in Northwest Europe, gone. But the sandbank is still there, 60 to 100 feet below the surface, and it still catches fishing nets. The currents there are different. The seabed rises suddenly, and trawlers know to be careful when they work those waters. They've been working them for centuries, and for just as long, they've been pulling up things that don't belong on the ocean floor. Sometimes, those nets bring up things that shouldn't be there, things that belonged to the last people who stood on dry ground before the sea claimed it all. Harpoons and axes and tools carved with skill and purpose, and each one is a message from that final island, proof that humans were there until the very end, adapting, surviving, refusing to abandon the last piece of a drowning world. Fishermen have been pulling artifacts from the North Sea for over a century, and the collection is staggering. Nearly 2,000 barbed points made from bone and antler, stone axes, hammers, adzes, and arrowheads. Microliths so small and delicate they could fit on a fingertip. A perforated pick carved from the leg bone of an aurochs, dredged up from brown bank, showing sophisticated understanding of tool-making and leverage. Each object is a fragment of a vanished culture, and together they tell a story of adaptation, skill, and survival. The barbed spear points are particularly fascinating. Large ones for hunting seal or boar, smaller ones for fish and birds. Some are worn smooth, used hard and often, showing years of service. Others look almost new, as if they were lost on a hunt and never recovered. I've held replicas, felt the balance, imagined the hands that shaped them. The weight distribution is perfect. The barbs angle back at exactly the right degree to catch and hold without breaking. These weren't crude implements. They were precision tools, designed with intention and refined through generations of knowledge. What strikes me most is the variety. These people weren't making one type of tool and using it for everything. They specialized, they innovated, they adapted their technology to specific tasks, specific prey, specific environments. That requires observation, experimentation, and cultural transmission of knowledge. It requires teachers and students, masters and apprentices, families passing down techniques that took lifetimes to perfect. But here's what troubles me. Most of these artifacts were found by accident, tangled in fishing nets or washed onto beaches after storms. We have no context, no idea which tools were used together, where exactly they came from, or what other materials might have surrounded them. It's like trying to understand a civilization from a scattered pile of objects with no labels, no structure, no story. A hammer from one site, an axe from another, a harpoon from somewhere else entirely, all mixed together in a chaotic jumble that tells us what they had but not how they lived. And yet, even scattered, they reveal something undeniable. The people of Doggerland were not primitive. They were sophisticated, resourceful, and deeply connected to their environment. They understood materials, knew which woods worked best for handles, which stone produced the sharpest edges, which animal bones could be worked without splitting. They knew the behavior of seals and salmon and aurochs. They knew when and where to hunt, when to move, when to gather. So why did they leave so little behind? Or is it simply that we haven't looked in the right places yet? Every trawler haul brings up artifacts from different locations, suggesting that settlements and camps were spread across the entire submerged landscape. But settlements leave more than just tools. They leave hearths, food waste, structural remains, and organic deposits that preserve in very specific conditions. And when I think about what else might be waiting down there, locked in the oxygen-free mud, I think about the forests, the submerged woodlands that still hold leaves on their branches, the peat deposits that preserve everything they touch, the ancient ecosystems frozen in time, waiting beneath the waves. In the late 1800s, something strange started washing ashore along the coasts of England and the Netherlands. Chunks of peat, fossilized tree stumps, branches still holding preserved leaves, seeds, and bark. At first, people assumed they were recent debris, trees lost to storms or coastal erosion. But when geologists examined them closely, they realized these were ancient, thousands of years old, remnants of forests that grew when the North Sea was dry land. Geologist Clement Reid called them submerged forests, and he was right. Beneath the North Sea lie the remains of vast woodlands, fenlands, and river valleys that once stretched across Doggerland. Oak, willow, birch, and alder, frozen in the oxygen-free mud, waiting. The preservation is extraordinary. In some deposits, bark still clings to branches. Leaves retain their shape, seeds remain intact, looking as if they fell yesterday rather than 8,000 years ago. Recent breakthroughs in sedimentary ancient DNA have allowed scientists to analyze these deposits in ways that were impossible even a decade ago. By extracting and sequencing DNA from sediment cores, researchers can now identify which species lived where, how the ecosystem changed over time, and even detect catastrophic events like the Storga tsunami. It's like reading a molecular history book written in mud. In one core, scientists found evidence of a massive spike in woody biomass, trees and vegetation torn up and deposited in chaotic layers, matching the timing of the tsunami. The forest remembered the wave. The DNA told the story of that violent day when the ocean surged inland, ripping up everything in its path, depositing it in jumbled, turbulent layers that settled as the waters receded. It's one of the most direct pieces of evidence we have that the tsunami actually happened the way the models predict. But here's what fascinates me. The DNA also reveals organisms that don't match anything we know today. Fragments from what scientists call dark phylogenetic space, species that existed then but have since vanished. Doggerland wasn't just a drowned land, it was an entire biome, an ecosystem unlike anything currently alive. The plant communities were different. The animal populations followed different patterns. The climate, the hydrology, the entire web of life operated in ways that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Think about what that means. We're not just looking at a lost human culture, we're looking at a lost world, an entire ecological system that functioned for thousands of years and then disappeared, replaced by cold salt water and the current communities of the North Sea. And we're only beginning to decode what it looked like. Which plants dominated which areas? How forests transitioned to wetlands, where fresh water met salt water and created unique brackish environments that supported species we can barely identify. The forests are still there, buried under centuries of sediment, and they're still telling stories if we know how to listen. But forests and ecosystems are context. What we really want are the places where people lived, worked, gathered, and built their lives. Places where the tools and the forests and the bones all come together. And there's one location where researchers believe they finally found exactly that. There's a place called Brown Bank, an elongated sand ridge about 100 kilometers east of Great Yarmouth. For decades, it's been a hot spot for accidental discoveries. Worked bone, stone, tools, and even human remains have been dredged up by fishing trawlers in concentrations that suggest something significant. Not just a hunting camp or a temporary shelter, a settlement, maybe even a large one. The artifact density is what caught researchers' attention. When you find one or two tools in an area, it suggests someone passed through. When you find dozens from the same location, tangled in nets year after year, it suggests people stayed. They lived there, built structures, returned season after season, created a place that meant something beyond mere survival. In 2018, a team of archaeologists from the University of Bradford, Ghent University, and the Flanders Marine Institute conducted detailed geophysical surveys of Brown Bank, using multiple seismic sources simultaneously. They weren't just looking at the modern seabed. They were peering through layers of marine sediment searching for the ancient land surfaces buried beneath. What they found was extraordinary. Preserved land surfaces, river valleys, and former lake shores dating back more than 8,000 years, buried under layers of marine sediment. The imaging showed channels where rivers once flowed, depressions where lakes once held fresh water, elevated areas where camps could have been established above seasonal flooding. It was a Mesolithic landscape, frozen in time, waiting to be explored. They extracted shallow cores and confirmed it. They'd reached a Mesolithic land surface, a place where people once walked, hunted, and lived. The sediment changed character at that level. Different composition, different compaction, the signature of dry land rather than seabed. This wasn't speculation. This was physical confirmation that they'd found what they were looking for. But they haven't excavated it yet. Not fully. The technology exists. The location is known. But the North Sea is deep, cold, and unforgiving. Recovering large volumes of sediment from underwater sites is expensive, dangerous, and slow. The logistics are staggering. You need specialized equipment, research vessels, experienced dive teams, and funding that runs into millions. And even then, you're working blind most of the time, groping through silt in near zero visibility, hoping you're in the right spot. So the settlement waits, still buried, still untouched. And I think about it often. How many people lived there? What were their names, their fears, their joys? Did they see the waters rising? Did they leave, migrating inland to higher ground? Or did they stay until the end, watching the sea claim their world piece by piece? We may never know, but the site is there, preserved in the anaerobic dark, holding answers we haven't yet asked the right questions to find. Hearths that could tell us what they ate, post holes that could reveal what they built, tool caches that could show us their entire technological repertoire in context, not scattered across the seabed by trawler nets and currents, and most tantalizingly, evidence of what they did when they came together. Because settlements weren't just places to live, they were gathering points, social centers, where something larger than daily survival took place. One of the most intriguing discoveries about Mesolithic societies isn't a physical artifact at all. It's a pattern. Evidence of seasonal gatherings, large concentrations of tools and remains that suggest people came together at specific times and places throughout the year. These weren't random meetings. They were organized, anticipated, events that mattered deeply to the communities who participated in them. In Western Britain, these gatherings happened on cliff tops overlooking sealing grounds, timed to coincide with the arrival of seals and the salmon runs in early autumn. Thousands of stone tools have been found clustered in these locations, far more than any single family group would need. The density suggests crowds. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds, converging on the same spot year after year. But Doggerland was different. It was vast, resource-rich, crisscrossed with rivers and wetlands that would have supported enormous populations of fish, birds, and game. If gatherings happened there, and the density of artifacts suggests they did, they would have been larger, more complex, and more significant than anything we found on land. Imagine river confluences where multiple groups could travel by boat, elevated ground near prime hunting territories, places where dozens of family groups from across hundreds of miles could meet, trade, share information, and celebrate. These weren't just hunting parties, they were social events, opportunities for young people to find mates outside their immediate family groups, preventing inbreeding and strengthening genetic diversity across the population, chances to exchange information about distant territories, mutual techniques, seasonal patterns, weather changes, and survival strategies. In a world without writing, without formal institutions, these gatherings were how culture survived, how knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Think about what would have been discussed around those fires. Stories about successful hunts, warnings about dangerous animals or treacherous terrain, techniques for working bone or stone, songs that encoded information about migration routes and seasonal changes, perhaps even early forms of mapping, describing landscapes through narrative and shared memory. This was education, politics, religion, and entertainment, all rolled into one vital institution. But we don't know where they gathered in Doggerland. We don't know what they did there, what rituals they performed, or what stories they told around the fires. The seismic maps show potential sites, high ground near river confluences, places where multiple groups could have converged. But until we excavate, until we find the remains of hearths, tool caches, and the bones of feasts, it's all speculation. Still, the thought lingers. What if the most important sites in Doggerland weren't settlements at all? What if they were gathering places, sacred grounds, locations that held meaning beyond survival? And what if those places are still down there, untouched, waiting for someone to find them? The bones of the feasts would tell us what they hunted, and one animal appears more than any other in the scattered remains pulled from the seabed, a creature so massive and dangerous that hunting it required courage, coordination, and weapons strong enough to pierce its hide. I've seen the bones of aurochs in museums, and they're staggering. Massive wild cattle, ancestors of modern domestic cows, standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder with horns that could span 3 feet. They roamed Doggerland in herds, grazing the river valleys and wetland edges, and the Mesolithic people hunted them. Not often, not casually. Aurochs were dangerous, powerful, and killing. One required coordination, skill, and courage. A full-grown aurochs bull could weigh nearly 3,000 pounds. Its horns were weapons that could gore a human with a single toss of the head. Its hooves could crush bones. And it was fast, far faster than you'd expect for an animal that size. Hunting one meant tracking it for days, learning its patterns, waiting for the right moment when it was isolated or vulnerable. And then came the kill, a dangerous dance of spears and movement where one mistake meant death. But when they succeeded, a single aurochs could feed a group for days. The meat alone was a windfall. Add in the hide, the sinew, the bone, and you had resources that would last weeks or months. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal served a purpose, transformed through skill and knowledge into tools, shelter, clothing, and food. One of the most remarkable artifacts from Doggerland is the Aurochs bone pick, a tool made from the leg bone of one of these giants. The bone is perforated, carefully shaped, clearly used for digging or prying, possibly to extract roots, shellfish, or other buried resources. It's a beautiful object, functional and elegant, and it tells us something important. The people of Doggerland didn't just hunt aurochs. They used every part of the animal, transforming bone into tools that extended their reach. But aurochs were more than food and raw material. In many prehistoric cultures, large animals held symbolic power. They appeared in cave paintings, ritual sites, and burial contexts. Did the Doggerland people revere the aurochs? Did they tell stories about them, see them as spirits of the land, or honor them in ways we can't yet detect? The careful modification of the bone pick suggests respect, even reverence. This wasn't just utility. This was craft, elevated to something approaching art. We don't know, but the bones keep appearing in the nets, weathered and ancient, carrying the weight of a world that no longer exists. And every time one surfaces, I wonder what else we're missing. What other animals lived there? What other relationships existed between humans and the wild? Aurochs, yes, but also red deer, elk, wild boar, seals, salmon, pike, and countless species of birds that migrated through those wetlands. Each one part of an ecosystem so rich it's hard to imagine from our modern perspective. And that richness is exactly what makes the central mystery of Doggerland so frustrating. With all this abundance, with thousands of years of occupation, with sophisticated people living in optimal conditions, we should have found far more than we have. The archaeological record should be overwhelming, but it's not. And the question that haunts every researcher is simple. Where is everything else? Here's the problem that haunts every Doggerland researcher I've spoken to. There should be more. More sites, more artifacts, more evidence. An area of over 17,000 square miles, inhabited for thousands of years by sophisticated hunter-gatherers, should have left behind a monumental archaeological record. But it hasn't. Or rather, we can't find it. Part of the issue is preservation. Organic materials decompose, wood rots, leather disintegrates, textiles dissolve, even bone crumbles if conditions aren't perfect. What survives are stone tools and the occasional piece of worked bone, usually only when trapped in anaerobic sediment or peat where oxygen can't reach it to fuel decay. So we're looking at a fraction of what once existed, the most durable remnants of a material culture that was primarily made from things that don't last. But there's another problem: accessibility. The North Sea is deep, cold, and murky. Divers can't explore it easily. Traditional archaeological methods don't work underwater. You can't just excavate a grid square when you're 60 feet below the surface in near zero visibility, with strong currents pulling at you. And even with modern seismic technology, we can only map the subsurface, not excavate it. We can see where sites should be, but reaching them is another matter entirely. So we're left with fragments, scattered finds, glimpses of a civilization filtered through fishing nets and accidental dredging. It's like trying to understand ancient Rome from a handful of coins and pottery shards found in a riverbed. You know something significant was there, but you can't see the full picture. You can't understand the complexity, the scale, or the richness of what was lost. And then there's the tsunami. If the Storga wave scoured the coastlines, dragging settlements and artifacts back into the sea during the drawdown, then much of the archaeological record may have been destroyed or displaced, buried deeper under layers of turbulent sediment, scattered wider across the seabed, lost in the chaos of that single catastrophic day. The very event that might have ended Doggerland also erased much of the evidence that could tell us how people lived there. But I keep coming back to one question. If we can't find the evidence we expect, does that mean it's not there? Or does it mean we're looking in the wrong way, asking the wrong questions, searching for the wrong things? Maybe Mesolithic people in Doggerland lived so lightly on the land that they left minimal traces. Maybe their settlements were temporary, seasonal, constantly moving. Maybe they built with materials that have completely vanished, leaving nothing but ghost imprints and sediment layers we haven't learned to read yet. Because something happened in Doggerland, something significant, and the absence of evidence is in itself a kind of mystery. But absence isn't the only puzzle. There's also timing. The convergence of events that brought Doggerland to its end didn't happen in isolation. The sea was rising, yes. The tsunami struck, certainly. But there was something else, something that made survival even harder. A sudden shift in climate that turned an already desperate situation into something far worse. Around 8,200 years ago, the climate changed abruptly. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped by several degrees in a matter of decades, triggering what scientists call the 8.2 kiloyear event, one of the most severe cold snaps of the Holocene. This wasn't a gradual cooling. This was sudden, dramatic, and devastating to ecosystems and human populations across the northern latitudes. The cause is still debated. Some researchers link it to the sudden draining of glacial lake gases in North America, a massive body of fresh water trapped behind retreating ice sheets. When the ice dam broke, billions of gallons of cold fresh water poured into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents and triggering a cascade of climatic shifts. Others point to volcanic activity or solar variability. Whatever the cause, the effects were undeniable. Summers became shorter, winters harsher, growing seasons contracted, and for the people of Doggerland, already coping with rising sea levels and shrinking territory, this was catastrophic. Game animals would have migrated south or east, following the shifting climate zones. Plant resources dwindled as cold-adapted species replaced the temperate vegetation that had sustained Mesolithic communities for generations. Fish populations shifted, following changing water temperatures and currents. But here's the eerie part. The 82K2 cold snap coincided almost exactly with the start of tsunami. Within decades of each other, possibly within years, Doggerland was hit by a double catastrophe: freezing temperatures and a massive tsunami. Flood and frost. It's hard to imagine a worse combination of disasters. And somewhere in that confluence of events, the last remnants of Doggerland slipped beneath the waves. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavia and Britain shows a decline in human activity during this period, as if entire populations vanished or relocated. Sites that had been occupied for centuries were suddenly abandoned. Tool assemblages change, suggesting different groups moving into areas previously held by others. The archaeological signature is one of disruption, displacement, and crisis. But where did they go? Did they migrate inland, following retreating coastlines and dwindling resources? Did they push into territories already occupied by other groups, creating conflict and competition? Did they adapt, becoming maritime people who lived from the sea rather than the land, developing new technologies and strategies to survive in a fundamentally changed world? Or did they simply die out, overwhelmed by forces beyond their control or comprehension? The cold snap doesn't just explain the end of Doggerland, it complicates it. And it raises uncomfortable questions about resilience, adaptation, and what happens when multiple crises converge at once. It forces us to consider not just the physical drowning of the land, but the cultural and social collapse that might have accompanied it, the loss of knowledge, traditions, and ways of life that had persisted for millennia. But to understand how complete that loss was, we first need to understand what was lost. And that understanding only became possible when technology finally allowed us to see what had been invisible for 8,000 years. When the hidden world beneath the waves finally revealed its secrets. The breakthrough came in the early 2000s, not from archaeologists, but from oil companies. Seismic surveys conducted for offshore drilling inadvertently mapped the subsurface geology of the North Sea in extraordinary detail. They were looking for oil and gas deposits, sending sound waves down through layers of sediment and rock, reading the echoes to understand what lay beneath. And buried within that data was Doggerland. Riverbeds carved deep into ancient bedrock. Valleys that once carried fresh water to the sea. Lake basins where Mesolithic families might have camped during seasonal migrations. Coastlines that once marked the boundary between land and ocean, now buried under hundreds of feet of marine sediment. An entire submerged landscape that no one had been able to see before suddenly appeared in the data, waiting to be interpreted. Researchers like Vincent Gaffney at the University of Bradford realized what they had and began collaborating with geologists and marine scientists to refine the data. The result was astonishing. Computer models now show thousands of miles of rivers snaking across a vast plain, dozens of freshwater lakes, estuaries where rivers met the sea, Hills rising from wetlands, forests clustering along watercourses. It looked like a paradise for Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Rich, diverse, abundant. The level of detail is extraordinary. You can trace individual river channels, see where tributaries joined, identify oxbow lakes and meanders that suggest slow-moving lowland rivers. You can map elevation changes, distinguish between well-drained uplands and waterlogged valleys. You can even identify ancient coastlines, tracking how the sea encroached over centuries, generation by generation, drowning the land meter by meter. But the maps also revealed something unsettling: the rate of drowning. By tracking ancient shorelines and dating sediment cores, scientists calculated that sea levels rose about 6 feet per century during Doggerland's final millennia. That's fast. Not apocalyptically fast, but fast enough that within a few generations, entire regions would have been transformed. Coastlines that grandparents knew would have been underwater by the time their grandchildren were old. Hunting territories would have become marshland. Freshwater springs would have turned brackish. The land itself was betraying them. The maps don't just show us where Doggerland was, they show us how it died. Slowly, relentlessly, the sea advancing from the north and south simultaneously, squeezing the habitable land into an ever-shrinking corridor, rivers backing up as their mouths flooded, lakes expanding into brackish lagoons, and the people living there watched it happen, powerless to stop it, adapting as best they could until adaptation was no longer possible. But maps can only tell us so much. They show topography, not culture, geography, not memory. They reveal the stage but not the actors, the landscape but not the lives lived upon it. To truly understand Doggerland, we need to go deeper. We need to touch the actual land surfaces, extract the sediments, analyze the deposits, and recover the artifacts in context. And that's exactly what some researchers are finally preparing to do, because the depths still guard their secrets, and those secrets are waiting. There are places in the North Sea where the seabed has barely been touched. Zones where sediment cores hint at preserved land surfaces, where sonar reveals anomalies that could be structures, hearths, or concentrations of artifacts. But they remain unexplored. Too deep, too expensive, too difficult. And so Doggerland keeps its secrets. I think about this often, standing on coastal cliffs or aboard research vessels, staring at the water and knowing what lies beneath. Entire villages, hunting grounds, burial sites, sacred places, all of it still there, locked in the anaerobic mud, waiting for technology and funding and courage to catch up with curiosity. The sites exist. We know where some of them are. But reaching them is another matter entirely. Recent advances in underwater archaeology, remote sensing, and sedimentary DNA analysis have opened new possibilities. Projects are underway, expeditions are being planned. Brown Bank in particular remains a target, a site where researchers believe they can finally excavate a Mesolithic settlement in situ. Not just dredged artifacts torn from context, but actual occupation layers, preserved floors, hearths, tool caches, and organic deposits that could reveal how people actually lived. The technology exists now to do what was impossible a generation ago. Remotely operated vehicles can navigate the depths, taking high-resolution images and extracting targeted sediment samples. Coring equipment can pull up meters of undisturbed sediment, preserving the layers exactly as they were deposited. DNA analysis can identify species from fragments too small to see, and computer modeling can reconstruct entire landscapes from scattered data points, bringing lost worlds back to life in digital form. But even if they succeed, even if they bring up cores filled with artifacts, pollen, DNA, and the traces of ancient lives, it will only be a beginning. Doggerland was vast, complex, culturally rich, and we've barely scratched the surface. Brown Bank might yield one settlement, but there were dozens, maybe hundreds scattered across those 17,000 square miles, each one with its own story, each one holding pieces of a puzzle we're only beginning to understand. So the question remains, what else is down there? What stories are still waiting to be told? What mysteries will the sea finally release? Tools we can't imagine, burial practices we don't understand, evidence of beliefs, rituals, and social structures that challenge everything we think we know about Mesolithic life, perhaps even writing or symbolic systems that predate anything currently in the archaeological record. The possibilities are endless, and that's both exciting and humbling. And perhaps most importantly, what will we learn about ourselves when we finally uncover the world that drowned 8,000 years ago? Because Doggerland isn't just about the past. It's about resilience, adaptation, loss, and memory. It's about what we carry with us when the world changes beyond recognition. It's about the fact that some mysteries refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep the water runs. And it's about the questions that linger long after the expedition ends, whispered in the darkness like echoes from a world that refuses to be forgotten. I'm standing on a beach in Norfolk, watching the tide roll in. The same tide that rolls over Doggerland twice a day, every day, has done so for 8,000 years. The water is cold, gray, indifferent. It doesn't remember what it drowned, but the land beneath does. Every artifact pulled from the depths is a refusal to be forgotten. Every bone, every tool, every fragment of worked antler is a voice calling across the millennia, saying we were here, we lived, we mattered. And I think that's what drives this obsession, this need to recover what was lost. It's not just about understanding the past, it's about recognizing that entire worlds can vanish, and if we're not careful, we lose more than geography, we lose perspective. Doggerland teaches us something uncomfortable, that permanence is an illusion, that the ground beneath our feet is more fragile than we want to believe. Those Mesolithic families watched their world transform over generations, coastlines retreating year by year, and they adapted until they couldn't anymore. They moved, they changed, they survived as long as survival was possible, and when the sea finally claimed the last islands, they carried what they could, the knowledge, the songs, the stories, into new lands and new lives. But some things couldn't be carried. Some memories drowned with the forests and rivers and gathering places. And we'll never know exactly what was lost in those cold waters. We'll never hear the songs they sang or know the names they gave to the hills and valleys. We can only catch glimpses, fragments, whispers from the deep. Another piece of the puzzle. Another secret swallowed by the ages. But I've learned one thing on this path. History doesn't whisper, it waits. And Doggerland is still waiting, patient and silent beneath the waves, holding mysteries we haven't yet learned to ask about. The depths guard their secrets well, but they don't keep them forever. The tide is turning now, and somewhere below, in the anaerobic dark, the drowned world remembers.